So, you want to be a doctor. You want to be a doctor. Sit down. We need to talk. And let me show you some of my books. Okay, so keep in mind, I went to medical school almost 20 years ago. Yeah, almost 20 years ago. I finished college over 20 years ago. I still have some of my books because the amount of time that I spent with some of those books, okay, I still keep them because honestly, some of them I still use as reference and some of them I really still love. I really do still love them and I just can't part with them. But anyway, just remember, you will be confronted with more material than you have ever seen. And you're just going to have to get used to it. I remember the first time I walked into anatomy class, gross anatomy class. It was this huge lecture room. There were tons of, students. And the anatomy teacher was talking so fast. And I remember thinking like, oh my God, is this man speaking German? Because I have no idea what he's saying. I cannot believe the amount of material he's throwing at us, and he's talking so fast and he's saying terms I don't understand. But you know what? By the time you graduate, you will understand most of that material. You will not know all of it, but you will definitely understand most of that material. If you were used to cramming in college, it does not work. It does not work in medical school because you have so much material and you are required to learn it in so much detail that you will need to understand. You will need to understand a lot of concepts, a lot of intricate details. And so cramming just will not work in med school. You're going to have to learn better study habits. You're going to have to learn how to write things out. You're going to have to learn how to study efficiently. You're going to have to learn how to use study groups, study materials efficiently. And you're going to have to learn that very fast because otherwise you will feel like you're drowning in tons of information. And again, that last minute cramming, you need to let it go because maybe it worked for you in college. You thought you were super smart, but this is medical school. A third tip I would give you for anyone considering medical school is time management. Again, there's so much material. Your classes end late and then you're required to go back and study. If you just think about gross anatomy, for example, after all the lectures, you would still need to go back to the lab to learn how to identify a lot of the structures that he talked about in class, how to dissect your cadaver and all of those things. There's a lot of work. And so time management is really crucial. You might need to get a tutor or you might need to get a counselor to discuss your schedule and how best to, manage your time between studying, between sleeping, between eating, between dealing with your family on textbooks. So just be prepared. Like I said, I have a ton of books that I still have that were helpful. The Successful Medical Student, First Aid, and I'm sure you guys, nowadays have a newer version of this. My anatomy book by Snell, which I still have. And I wonder how much this was. Oh my God. A lot of the books are almost $100. There is my surgery book. As you can see, sometimes you will have to buy it used if you can save some money. Another anatomy book. This was $42. There's your physical diagnosis book. This one was used. So whenever possible, you can buy it used. And I know now a lot of schools are doing things electronically, so you may or may not need a textbook. But I know that for me personally, I liked having books that I could, highlight important things about, highlight some pictures that I wanted to go back to. So just know again that you're going to be spending a lot of money on textbooks. Of course, you still have your accommodations, you still have food that you have to budget for. So you're going to need some student loans, some grants, unless of course, and you probably are, because you applied to medical school, you want to be a doctor, so you're probably smart, you were used to getting good grades. But I think one thing I would tell you is that you're going to have to really get used to knowing that you are not going to be the smartest person there. There are going to be tons of people, tons of students that are so much more capable academically, or so much more smarter, if you will. And if you were in the top of your class, sometimes now in med school, you're going to be near the middle, or sometimes even on the bottom of the class. And I really had to get used to that. Sometimes that can be very overwhelming, and that can really trip you out when you are used to being in control, getting great grades, and here you are struggling in medical school. Because believe it or not, some of us are going to struggle, and I definitely struggled academically in medical school. And what's important is that you don't let that beat you down emotionally, because there's so much coming at you and it's easy to feel overwhelmed, that you need to find, friends or partners who you can confide in. Hopefully you have a supportive spouse or boyfriend, or your family, your parents, but you're going to need some sort of support system. Of course, there are counselors in medical school, and they are there, a great resource, but you're going to need to get comfortable realizing that sometimes you're going to fail a test. Yes, many people fail a test or two in medical school, and it's not the end of the world. You may take the MCAT more than once prior to getting to medical school. Now that you're in med school, you have to take step 1 or step 2 and eventually step 3. And for some of us, you may not pass step 1 the first time. And I remember feeling devastated, but then there was other students who were also in the same boat, and together we went to a program and got extra help and basically ended up passing. So it's not the end of the world if you don't pass your test or all your tests the first time. Again, it is an overwhelming amount of information, and if you didn't start off at the best school or didn't get a great foundation, it is likely that you might struggle sometimes in med school. I would say is in medical school, you will need a life outside of medicine. Because of the overwhelming amount of information, it's very easy to get burnt out. And so it's really important to balance your academics with some sort of social life or something that you enjoy doing. For me, I had my spouse, or my fiance at the time, because I actually ended up getting married while I was in medical school. And I actually also ended up having my first child by the time I was in my 4th year of medical school. So it was always my goal, my dream, to have my first child when I graduated. And I'll do a separate video about having children or getting married and doing, things like that while in medical school, because it can be challenging. So many of you that are in relationships, if your spouse or your boyfriend or your partner doesn't understand the pressures that you have to go through, or they aren't in the medical field, or maybe they are in the medical field and you're both super busy all the time, it is also likely that some of you may end up divorced or broken up. Because I remember a lot of couples that started out married, or started out in long-term relationships once they were in medical school, they ended up breaking up because you're spending so much time with other people away from your home, away from your spouse, that you end up, moving apart from each other, either because again, you're spending all this time with other people, or because your partner or spouse just doesn't understand the pressures and is not as supportive. But there is so much stress involved with committing to this education that you find yourself not giving enough time, towards your relationship. So just something you need to be, aware of. One step. College, you took a ton of tests. Now you're in medical school and it's going to be nonstop tests. You've got your, medical school tests that your professors give you. And then, of course, you've got these other standardized tests, because there is step 1 that you're going to have to take after your second year. And then there is step 2 that you will take during your last year, before or at your last year. And of course, there is step 3 that you will take sometime, during or after residency, but usually, during residency. So just get used to the fact that whether or not you like taking tests, and I was someone who really hated taking tests. I always felt super, super anxious. I remember times where we were in the car, I would have to take an anatomy test, for example, and they would put these little pins on the cadaver and you would have to walk by each station and label it. And I remember being in the car with Kenton on the way to the test and literally having to stop the car to throw up. It's just like I never quite got used to that anxiety, overwhelming fear right before a test. So, everybody responds differently. Over the years, it got better. But for me, it was nerve-wracking. I remember by the time I was in, I guess the second year of medical school, I had learned some techniques where I would listen to music, relaxing music before the test. I wouldn't talk to anybody before the test, and I would walk in feeling really calm. For a test, the more confident you're going to feel, the more relaxed you're going to be before a test. So instead of avoiding the material, sometimes we do that when we're scared or we feel overwhelmed. We avoid studying, we put it off, we put it to the side, we procrastinate. And all that does is create more anxiety. So the more prepared you are, just get started. Start studying a little bit at a time. The more times you see the material, repetition, the better it's going to be. It's mostly your didactics. It's all the studying, a lot of material to learn, biochemistry, physiology, anatomy, genetics, all of that. So the first year is a lot of studying, a lot of textbooks in the classroom. And for some people, that can be very challenging. I really did not like my first 2 years of medical school. I felt like it was absolute torture. Now, the second 2 years of med school, I really enjoyed, because that was when we did clinicals. That's when you really got out and dealt with real human beings. So you got to practice your clinical skills. You got to, touch people. You got to examine patients. You got to apply all the material that you had been learning to real life. I really enjoyed that. It's also a time where you get to try different specialties. And so I think that this is a very important time, because this is when you decide whether you want to go into internal medicine, whether you want to be a surgeon, whether you want to go into OBGYN, whether you want to go into family practice, all the different specialties. This is the opportunity you get to shadow someone, spend some time in the clinic, taking these different rotations. So I think actually the last 2 years is also very important, as important as the first 2 years, because if you don't know yourself and if you don't spend enough time picking the right specialty, you can end up later in life, regretting some of your choices. So this is the time when you need to spend exploring what it is that you want. I think what's really important to consider before you go to medical school that I haven't touched upon is your emotional maturity. For many medical students or future doctors, they go in very young. On average, they are about 22. And for some of them, they are not emotionally mature. So they might be book smart and have the ability to cram or learn a ton of information, but they're not emotionally mature or able to deal with the pressures that medical school comes with. So for many, they end up, turning to alcohol, sometimes even drugs, or sometimes dropping out, or bad relationships, or it just shows up when they're dealing with patients. They're not able to talk to them appropriately, or may not have the best bedside manner, or end up later in their career doing things that are unethical because they didn't have a good foundation. So I think it's very important to make sure that you are emotionally ready for the demands of medicine, because it will test class. Because again, sometimes we're not taught, prior to medical school, we're not always taught about how to handle certain situations. And you will find that sometimes in life, the answer is not always in a textbook. Sometimes you will be faced with some ethical issues that you don't know how to handle. Certain relationships that you might end up engaging in that aren't appropriate, or certain things that you say to your patients that aren't appropriate, and you don't necessarily have the knowledge to answer or how to deal with these things. So if at all possible, if your medical school offers an ethics class, I strongly suggest you take it, because otherwise you will find later in your career that you have problems that could have been averted had you known. So I hope you found these tips helpful and getting a little bit of insight to my experience. Obviously, everybody's experience is going to be different depending on your interests and depending on your strengths. So these were my tips, my experience. And again, if you are a young person thinking about medical school, or you are in medical school thinking about a specialty, I hope this was helpful. If there is something I haven't answered, because I know this was a little bit general, please leave me a comment. I check my comments often, and I always try to respond. Make sure you have subscribed if you want to see more videos. If you have video ideas you would like me to discuss, for example, I'm planning to do a video about being pregnant or having children and having a family in medical school and in residency. So look out for that video. And again, I hope you have found this helpful, and God bless.